She said it loud enough for the whole table to hear useless mother-in-law, and the laughter that followed was not quiet. I felt it hit my chest like a slap, but I did not flinch. I only closed the small wooden box in my purse, the one holding the keys to the $5 million house I had planned to give them as a wedding gift. The piano kept playing, cameras kept flashing, and the servers kept pouring champagne. But suddenly, the ballroom at the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas felt colder. Savannah leaned in toward her bridesmaids, pretending to whisper, yet every syllable was aimed like a needle. She said that my dress was old, that I probably had nothing to contribute, that my son married down because he needed a woman who could carry the family instead of a mother who just survived on sympathy. The girls giggled and covered their mouths, but watched me for a reaction, hungry for humiliation. I kept my shoulders straight, but my heart trembled. I had watched my son Drew promise forever to her an hour earlier under crystal chandeliers, and I had been ready to welcome her with grace and generosity. The deed draft was in a sealed envelope at home, the trust addendum ready for signature, and I had even scheduled a private showing of the University Park property as a surprise. But now they looked at me like I was something small, a decoration in the background of their party. When the MC thanked everyone who contributed to the wedding, he praised the bride's family for paying for the venue, thanked her mother for the floral contracts, thanked her aunt for the dress fittings. My name was not mentioned. The camera zoomed in on the bridal party, and Savannah's mother smiled like a queen. She made sure to speak loudly about the housewarming soon, as if the $5 million gift was guaranteed, as if my silence meant consent. I watched people nod already, imagining themselves invited. A server passed by with a silver tray, and I asked for sparkling water. My hands did not shake. I had learned long ago that the quietest person in the room often holds the most power. Savannah tapped her phone, held it up high at the perfect angle, and recorded herself posing with her friends. In the background, her voice carried again. She said, "Poor Drew. He has a mother with nothing to give." When they laughed this time, the sound felt like glass. This was not teasing. It was cruelty designed to show her territory. My chair was at the front table, but I moved one seat over. I waved down a coordinator and asked gently if Savannah's mother could be moved to a different seat for group photography. Something about symmetry. She was escorted halfway across the ballroom, confused but smiling politely. She did not know that she had just been shifted out of every main frame of the wedding album. A petty gesture, maybe, but a clean one. Then the twist came. A guest across the room looked at her phone, then at me, then back at her phone again. She had been tagged by accident in Savannah's story, the one where she called me useless. Her eyes widened and she walked over. She whispered that my name was on the screen. She showed me the video. Savannah, still recording, still laughing, had done it publicly. There it was. Evidence. Permanent. I said nothing. I simply nodded. The guest swallowed hard and deleted her comment before anyone noticed. That night was supposed to be about love and celebration. Instead, it became a catalog of insults, a parade of entitlement. Drew was too busy dancing to notice. He twirled his bride and smiled like a man blind to the storm forming around him. I wanted to protect him, but in that moment I understood something. The best lessons are not spoken. They are lived. I rested my hand on my purse, felt the box with the keys, and knew something inside me had changed. I would not raise my voice. I would not argue. I would not beg anyone to treat me with respect. When a family member from the bride's side leaned over and said in a sweet voice that some mothers feel insecure when they cannot contribute financially, I almost laughed. If only they knew. Silence was suddenly warm and sharp at the same time. My husband Charles used to say that real power never needs to announce itself. I remembered his words and felt my spine straighten. On the outside, the night continued, but inside a switch had flipped. They thought I was poor. They thought I was nothing, and they were about to learn how wrong they were. At the end of the evening, while Savannah posed for photos, I stood near the exit. I watched her mother realize she was missing from every important shot. Her face reddened. I thanked the photographers for their professionalism. One of them told me he had also captured audio from the live stream. He asked if I needed a copy. I smiled and said yes. When the guests left, I walked to my car heels, clicking softly on marble. The city lights of Dallas reflected on the glass doors behind me. I opened the box one last time, looked at the keys, and closed it with a soft click. Not tonight. They would not get that house. Not now. Maybe not ever. Sometimes quiet is not weakness. Sometimes quiet is strategy, and this time quiet was the beginning of justice. If you have ever stayed silent while someone tried to embarrass you in front of others, type me and let me know I am not alone. The next morning in Highland Park, the sun came in too bright through my kitchen windows, and the house felt heavier than usual. I brewed coffee and tried to steady my breathing, telling myself that last night had been a strange mistake of champagne and nerves, yet the replay of her voice, useless mother-in-law, would not leave my head. It echoed between the marble countertops and the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and for the first time in years, I felt like a guest in my own life. Charles and I had built everything slowly and honestly. Every brick of the Davenport portfolio came from sweat and discipline. We started with one small contracting crew, moved into commercial renovation, bought and sold land until the company stood firm across Dallas. And when he passed, I promised myself the business would never corrupt our son. So I kept the wealth quiet and made Drew work for his own footing. No flashy handouts, no luxury cars as gifts, just guidance and chances to grow, because money that arrives too easily often destroys good character. The plan was simple. After Drew married, I would give them the University Park house as a start $5 million of space to begin a family, plus a non-voting interest in one of the construction companies, enough to feel supported but not spoiled enough to learn responsibility. And I had been proud of that plan. I hoped the house would feel like love, not a trophy. But now, as the coffee cup warmed my hands, I wondered if silence had been a mistake. Maybe I had let them believe I was weak, invisible, something to mock without consequence. My phone buzzed. Drew had texted early, just left the hotel, he wrote too casually. "Mom, do not make things hard for Savannah. She is sensitive." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, and I forced myself to breathe, because there was a deeper sting hidden in those words. He believed I was the problem. He believed I had caused discomfort. He did not see what happened in that ballroom. He did not know that I had closed the box, not out of pettiness, but out of survival. Gaslighting comes in many forms. Sometimes it is quiet dismissal. Sometimes the person you raised unknowingly becomes a messenger for someone else's cruelty. And that realization pressed into my chest with a coldness that hurt more than the laughter last night. I poured the coffee out untouched. I opened my laptop and signed into the shared gallery for the wedding the photos had begun, uploading overnight. Savannah's mother appeared in every first batch, smiling, widely standing front and center. But I knew something. They did not know I had switched her seat near the end of the evening. The main shots would not hold her face after that moment. Maybe she would notice. Maybe she would not. But I decided to add one more small lesson, a quiet boundary disguised as courtesy. With 2 clicks, I changed the album permissions from public to private and removed access for the bride's family when the alert popped up on their phones. Later, it would say, "This album is no longer accessible due to privacy settings," a gentle message that their entitlement did not include ownership of the memories or the narrative. It was not revenge, not yet, it was simply space. I closed the laptop and walked through the house, touching the back of Charles's leather chair, running my fingers across the thick oak table where we once signed contracts late at night, and I thought about how he would have handled this situation. He always believed that arrogance reveals itself fastest when people think no one is watching, so he documented everything, every receipt, every promise, every lie. That thought pushed me to call Naomi, my attorney, not to start a war, but to prepare a shield, because respect without protection is just hope, and hope is not a strategy. Naomi answered on the second ring, her voice calm, sharp, always in control. And when I told her what happened, she did not gasp. She did not scold. She simply asked for facts. I told her about the live stream clip, the insults, the entitlement, and she listened the way a surgeon studies an X-ray with quiet precision. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and told me something I did not expect. She said Savannah had been late on a credit card account last year, $27,000 overdue, barely closed after a settlement. I felt my stomach tighten, because this was not about a rude comment at a wedding anymore. This was a pattern of financial recklessness, and it turned the $5 million house from a gift into a target. Savannah had married my son, and within hours she was performing superiority for strangers, whispering that I was poor, assuming everything I owned was already theirs. Now the picture grew clearer. Entitlement was not an accident, it was a strategy. I rubbed my temples and tried to breathe through the anger building under my ribs, because the betrayal last night was emotional. But this revelation was strategic, a red flag waving in daylight. Naomi suggested pulling a soft background report, nothing dramatic, just information, just clarity, and I agreed. I spent the rest of the morning walking through the garden, touching the rosemary bushes and the lemon tree, trying to settle the storm inside my chest. Drew's message still sat unread on the counter. Mom, do not make things hard. It replayed again and again, and each time it cut deeper. I wanted to call him, shake him, tell him what his bride had done, but mothers often fight their battles in silence to protect their children's hearts, even when it hurts. Still, silence cannot last forever. My purse rested beside me on the garden bench, and I opened the wooden box, looked at the keys, and whispered to myself that generosity must be protected by respect. Otherwise, it becomes a leash. A bird chirped from the fence, and in that moment I knew the story was changing. Drew thought I was just a quiet mother with no power. Savannah thought I was decoration. But they both forgot who built the foundation they stand on. If you discovered a hidden debt like that, knowing someone wanted your money more than your presence, would you still give them a gift worth millions, or would you wait and see who they really are underneath the smiles? The next day, the Dallas Petroleum Club glowed with its usual polished marble, and quiet money waiters in white shirts moved like a practiced orchestra, and I walked in, holding my purse, close determined to stay composed. Drew kissed my cheek and told me the brunch would be relaxed. Just family, just friends, just celebration. But the moment I stepped into the private dining room, I saw Savannah already positioned at the center. Bright dress, loud smile, and that same sharp glint in her eyes that had cut me open the night before she raised her champagne flute as if nothing had happened and introduced me to her cousins with sugary sweetness, calling me dear Lucille with a tone that felt like salt on a wound. At first, the conversation seemed harmless small talk about the ceremony, about how beautiful the ballroom looked, about the string quartet, but soon the comments turned subtle. At first, then bolder. Savannah rested her manicured hand on the table and said, "Some of us came to the wedding empty-handed and still expect to be treated like family." Her voice light and playful as if she were telling a harmless joke, but the words carried weight, a quiet cruelty wrapped in sugar. Every head turned. Every eye traced the line between her and me, and a ripple of whispering moved through the room. I kept my face calm because anger gives people like her what they want instead. I smiled politely and dabbed my napkin at the corner of my mouth, pretending not to hear, but inside I felt the floor tilt. Humiliation stung like a live wire up my spine, and still I said nothing. The server poured sparkling wine. Savannah lifted her glass high and announced cheers to new beginnings, and cheers to those who gave everything to make this perfect. Then she paused and added in a voice soaked with honey, "Even if some arrived with nothing at all." The table erupted with polite laughter, the kind that hides mockery beneath its teeth, and Drew shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He looked down at his plate, shoulders rigid, torn between his bride and his mother, too afraid to challenge her, too blind to see how deliberate the attack was. I took a small breath and let silence do its work, because silence is disarming. Silence is a mirror. Silence makes the cruel think they are winning, and that belief is useful. After the laughter faded, Savannah leaned forward and said she had the perfect idea. She wanted to decorate the University Park House immediately so she could film a TikTok tour for her followers. She wanted a statement chandelier, custom Italian, sofas, marble backsplash, and all she needed was for me to cover $85,000 in interior costs this week so the filming could stay on schedule. She said it while swirling her champagne like a queen, asking a servant to carry her train, as if the $5 million home was already hers, as if I should feel honored to foot the bill just to be included in her online performance. I asked calmly what made her think the house belonged to them already, and she blinked like she had been slapped. She quickly masked the surprise and said Drew told her it was just a matter of paperwork, because that is what good families do. They gift homes. They invest. They show up. I smiled again gently and told her paperwork takes time, gifts take respect, and rushed entitlement rarely ends well. The table went still for a moment, a thin frost cutting the air, and Savannah forced a laugh that sounded brittle. Her mother squeezed her hand under the table, as if steadying a child who had been scolded in public. When the plates were cleared, I excused myself to the restroom, not to cry, but to breathe, to let my heartbeat settle. And while I stood at the sink adjusting my earrings, I remembered the bouquet I had ordered to be sent to Savannah's mother later that evening, a massive arrangement of white lilies and blush roses, a symbol of welcome, and suddenly that kindness felt unearned. So I pulled out my phone and called the florist, my voice soft and courteous, and asked them to cancel the delivery when they asked for a reason. I told them the colors clashed with the concept, but instead of a refund, I requested that a small printed card be delivered to the bride's home. Instead, a simple note that read, "Thank you for your understanding." Nothing cruel, nothing loud, just a polite sentence that would hover in the air like a puzzle, the moment she realized something had been taken from her without drama. When I returned to the table, Savannah was scrolling through her phone recording snippets of the brunch, pretending every moment was a fairy tale. But she moved her camera in just the wrong direction and caught a server in the background, staring with wide eyes, not in admiration, but in shock, because he had been standing near enough to hear her remarks, and his phone had been in his pocket, recording audio for customer service training. At least that was what I assumed until later, when I learned the truth. As the brunch ended, Drew kissed my cheek again, a little too quickly nervous, and Savannah gave me a hug with arms that felt stiff as cardboard, pretending for the crowd, but not for me. And I walked to my car with quiet steps, the Dallas heat pushing against the glass of the lobby doors. That evening, Naomi called her voice calm and careful and told me that a young employee from the Petroleum Club had anonymously sent audio of Savannah's remarks to Colleen, my private investigator, attached with a note that said, "I thought she should hear this." My hand tightened around the phone because the universe has a strange way of protecting the quiet. The clip captured every word, every laugh, every insult, and this time it was not just a live stream that could disappear, it was clear audio saved on a device, digital evidence that no one could deny. For a moment, I pictured Savannah's face, if she knew that the stranger she mocked had just been handed a weapon she did not see coming. Not a threat, not a scream. Just proof. I sat on my couch, the wooden box with the keys beside me, and wondered if justice was already in motion, if the humiliation they thought I absorbed in silence would return to them with the weight of truth. If someone mocked you in front of family and strangers, would you stay silent like I did, or would you confront them in the moment? Tell me which kind of revenge lives in your heart. 2 days later, I was trimming the lavender near the back patio. When the doorbell rang, I expected a delivery or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, Savannah stood there with her mother, both dressed as if they were coming to a house. Showing not a visit, they did not even attempt small talk. They walked in without waiting for an invitation, their eyes sweeping over the foyer, the staircase, the chandelier, their smiles greedy, the kind that stretches too wide. And Savannah clapped her hands like a child entering a toy store, saying, "This will be perfect once we open the walls and add new light fixtures." I felt a tremor of disbelief because this was my home, a home built through decades of sacrifice, and yet they behaved as if ownership had already transferred. Savannah's mother carried a measuring tape and a tablet, and they began noting dimensions of the dining room, discussing where their furniture would go, which walls needed to be repainted, which closets could be converted, and every sentence dripped with certainty that the $5 million house was theirs by right of marriage. I asked calmly why they were measuring, and Savannah said we wanted to move in early since it is obviously our home, now better to stay ahead of the schedule so the designer can work without delay. I kept my voice measured as I reminded her that no transfer had occurred, no deed had been signed, no escrow was opened, and she blinked with that same look of irritation she wore at the brunch, a look that suggested I was being unreasonable for daring to protect what was mine. Savannah then smiled like she had prepared a backup argument. She pulled out a glossy brochure and told me she already had a designer lined up an influencer with a brand partnership, and all she needed was for me to transfer a retainer into his account so he could secure fabric and fixtures $80,000 to start a soft request disguised as a business proposal. But underneath it was pressure entitlement and the assumption that my wallet existed for her projects. I stood in the middle of the living room, the same living room where Charles and I had signed our first corporate contract, and I realized that silence alone would not protect me. I had to draw a boundary without losing grace. So I told them firmly that no money would be transferred, no designer would be hired, and no one would move into this home without a legally finalized gift. And that gift was not finalized. Savannah's face turned cold. Her mother whispered something sharp under her breath. Something about how some women hide their jealousy behind paperwork, and then they announced that more contractors were on their way to inspect the property as if my refusal meant nothing. I walked to the front porch and saw 2 trucks pull up workers stepping out with clipboards, ready to measure, ready to plan, ready to treat my house like their project site, and something inside me clicked, not anger, not fear, but strategy. I greeted the workers politely and told them the schedule had changed, that any inspections were postponed until further notice. And when they asked for the new time, I told them it was still unknown. They waited awkwardly in the driveway for a while, confused, calling Savannah, calling their office. But after half an hour they left, wasted time, wasted fuel, wasted entitlement. That was the point. Sometimes you do not need to shout to make someone feel small. You just let reality quietly refuse them. Savannah's mother huffed that this was childish, that a real family member would open her doors. But I simply smiled and said a real family member would wait to be invited. They left with stiff spines and angry footsteps, and I thought that would be the end of the day, but entitlement rarely accepts silence as defeat. That evening, my email pinged with a message from a law office. The subject line was formal request for disclosure regarding pending family property transfers, and the signature belonged to Mark Feldman, Savannah's attorney. The email claimed that since the marriage was lawful, they had a right to know the assets intended for Drew and Savannah. They wanted valuations, trust documents, corporate ownership details, even insurance portfolios, as if I owed them transparency, simply because Savannah wanted it. I read the email twice, amazed at the audacity, then forwarded it to Naomi with a single sentence. This just arrived. Within minutes, she called her voice sharper than usual. She said this was intimidation, masked in legal language, but legally meaningless because no transfer meant no entitlement. She asked permission to respond, and I told her to proceed. While she drafted her reply, I sat in my living room with the lights off, thinking about how quickly a family can turn into strangers, how marriage can invite a stranger into your life who thinks love means domination. The night grew quiet, and I remembered Charles again, his advice that every boundary you draw is a door to your dignity, and every time you let someone cross it without care, you lose a piece of yourself. So I closed my eyes and decided I would not lose a single inch. I checked the security cameras at the front of the house and confirmed the contractors had not returned. I deleted Savannah's texts asking for updates, and I opened my wooden box once more, the keys glimmering under the soft lamp, a reminder that gifts are privileges, not obligations. If someone sent a lawyer to your house, demanding to know your assets, not to protect you but to take from you, how would you stand up for yourself? Would you give in for peace or hold your ground in silence? The next morning, I woke before the sun, the house still silent, and I brewed coffee with a feeling in my chest that something new had shifted, a quiet certainty that Savannah would not accept yesterday's refusal as the end of her campaign. And I was right, because by noon Naomi called again, her voice calm but edged with disbelief. She told me the company credit card tied to my interior design firm had been used for an attempted purchase, $14,800, a luxury furniture deposit, processed through an online vendor. The charge had been declined because the account required verbal confirmation for purchases over $10,000, but the attempt alone was enough to turn the humiliation into a crime. I sat down slowly on the bench near the window, looking at the lemon tree in the yard, and wondered how a person could feel entitled enough to steal openly, not even waiting for permission. Not asking, just taking as if my business and my money were simply extensions of her desire. Naomi said she contacted the vendor and learned that Savannah had used her married name and claimed authorization on behalf of Davenport Interiors. She even provided my business email as verification, hoping the vendor would not check it closely, and that small detail made something inside me tighten. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated attempt. Still, I kept my breathing steady because panic grants power to the wrong person. Later that afternoon, Colleen sent a message short but heavy. She said she had found a string of texts between Savannah and a cousin, bragging about the house and planning to take control over every room. But buried deeper in the thread was something far more unsettling. Savannah joked about borrowing money from a 529 plan belonging to a niece on her side of the family. She said kids do not need that much for college these days. We can always put it back, it was said with emojis and laughter, but the meaning was sharp and alarming because a person who treats children's education funds as a temporary piggy bank will treat anything they touch with the same recklessness. I closed my eyes and thought of Charles again, how fiercely he protected children's futures, how he believed education was the only inheritance that truly mattered. And I felt a wave of anger rise not loud but deep, a storm forming quietly beneath the surface. Because disrespecting me was one thing, attacking the future of a child was another. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened the Davenport Interiors invoicing system. I created a document addressed to the vendor, a clean white page showing a charge of $0, a balance of $0, with one line written clearly across the top, $0 balance due, because nothing was authorized. I printed it and mailed a copy to Savannah's address. No accusation, no threat, just a mirror held up to her actions, a reminder that I had seen everything and would not play the fool she imagined. While the printer hummed, Naomi drafted a formal cease and desist letter, not with emotion but with precision, demanding Savannah immediately stop making defamatory statements about my finances and warning that any future attempt to use my business accounts would be treated as fraud, and reported Naomi's voice was ice when she read the letter aloud for approval, calm and controlled, the kind of quiet fury that wins legal battles. After she sent it, the house felt strangely still, as if waiting, and I walked into the garden for air, the evening warm cicadas, humming, the sky painted with the pink of sunset. And yet my thoughts were sharp, thinking about the woman who had married my son, not for love, but for access to my home, my company, my reputation. I imagined Savannah opening the mailbox and finding the invoice. I imagined the confusion turning into fear, then anger, then planning, because people like her do not stop when confronted. They shift strategies and push harder. Hours later, Drew texted again, asking why Savannah was upset, why I had mailed something that embarrassed her, why I could not just go along and keep the peace. And I read the message with a tired heart, because my son had not yet learned the cost of peace built on silence peace, purchased by surrender peace that becomes a cage. I typed no reply. The next morning, a new email arrived, this time from Mark Feldman, Savannah's attorney, accusing me of overreacting, claiming the attempted charge had been a mistake, that she simply misunderstood her role as part of the family business, that I was harming her emotionally by creating unnecessary barriers. I forwarded the email to Naomi without commentary, and within hours she responded with legal clarity, pointing out that pretending to have authority inside a company in order to make purchases is not a misunderstanding, it is fraud, and if Savannah attempted it again, we would escalate beyond warnings. By the time the day ended, the tension had taken a new shape, no longer merely humiliation, no longer entitlement, but a documented pattern of dishonesty. I sat on the couch with the wooden box beside me, running my thumb along the lid, thinking about how quickly love can turn into hunger when people think they smell money, thinking about how the house that was supposed to be a gift had become a shield, a weapon, a lesson. People who truly love do not take what is not theirs. People who respect you do not steal when they think you are not looking. It was strange how quiet the house felt now, like a storm building behind the walls, and yet I felt calm because the truth was collecting evidence for me piece by piece, without me needing to shout. If someone tried to take money meant for a child's college, if they saw a future and treated it like loose change, would you forgive easily, or would you see it as the moment to draw the hardest line possible? Tell me, when it comes to protecting the next generation, should revenge in a family inheritance drama be gentle, or should it be exact? 2 days passed, and the quiet felt deceptive, like the air before a storm, until small signals began to reach me from every direction. A neighbor who normally waved avoided eye contact, a woman from church who always hugged me after service, instead offered a tight smile and stepped away. And then the group messages began to buzz with silence, not a word to me directly, just the strange absence of voices that once felt familiar, and slowly I understood that Savannah had changed her strategy. She no longer tried to take from me in private, she was trying to destroy my reputation in public. It started with whispers in the church parking lot, phrases like, "Lucille is stingy," or "she made poor Savannah pay for everything," or "she is punishing her daughter-in-law because of jealousy." And though no one said the words to my face, they landed like stones all the same, heavy, cold, and carefully thrown. By the end of that week, I received a text from a woman I barely knew, asking if it was true that I refused to help my son start his new life, that I cut him off out of spite. And that was when I realized the smear campaign had taken full shape, because lies thrive when spoken softly and repeated often. I kept calm, though my hands shook slightly as I placed my phone on the table, because toxic family behavior always escalates when entitlement meets resistance, and now Savannah wanted to turn the world against me to get the house back into play. Soon after that, Drew called, his voice tired and conflicted. He said, "Mom, please do not make this bigger than it needs to be. People are talking, Savannah is hurt. Everyone thinks you hate her, and could you please lighten up?" And I listened without interrupting, because the worst pain is not the betrayal of strangers. It is hearing your own child ask you to surrender your dignity for the comfort of someone tearing you apart. He insisted he was stuck between us. He claimed he could see both sides, and I almost laughed, because there were not two sides. There was truth, and there was manipulation, and Drew had not yet learned to tell the difference. When the call ended, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim afternoon light. And if Savannah wanted to humiliate me socially, then I had no problem returning a lesson wrapped in silk, not anger. I created a shared Google Drive folder titled Etiquette 101 inside it. I placed a simple PDF containing phrases like, "Please and thank you and apologize when you are wrong, and do not spend money that is not yours." And then I expanded the lesson, adding articles about gratitude, charts about family boundaries, and a short slideshow labeled Basic Respect. After reviewing it twice, I shared the folder with every relative on Savannah's side of the family, along with a kind note saying, "I hope these resources would help us all communicate more respectfully during such an emotional season." and though my heart was calm, I imagined the exact moment each of them opened the folder, realizing the sting without a single insult spoke in quiet justice, delivered with perfect precision. That small act of silent revenge tasted sweeter than I expected, a reminder that dignity never requires shouting. After sending the folder, I logged into my financial portal and froze every single action related to the gift house. Escrow, halted, trust addendum, delayed, no one would receive $1 or a key until respect was restored, if ever. And the difference between threat and boundary is simple boundaries. Hold even when people cry. That evening, Colleen called her tone steady, and she said she finally finished verifying all the digital evidence, the wedding clip of Savannah, calling me useless mother-in-law, the brunch video where she mocked people who come empty-handed, yet demand family benefits, the screenshots of disrespect, the texts about taking money from the 529 plan, and the attempted charge for $14,800. She said everything was authenticated, downloadable, and ready to present if needed. And I sat back in my chair, breathing slowly, because this was no longer gossip or hurt feelings. This was a documented pattern of behavior, and the smear campaign only made the truth sharper. I thought again of Drew, torn between love and manipulation, and I wondered how many people suffer in silence because a child takes the wrong side. It is easy to preach unity when someone else pays the price, but unity without honesty is a cage, and I had spent enough of my life preserving other people's comfort at the cost of my self-respect. That night, the garden lights flickered. On the wind passed through the trees, and I stood alone outside, listening to the distant sounds of traffic, thinking of Charles, and how he always said character is revealed when money enters the room, and Savannah had revealed herself loudly. The house that was supposed to be a blessing had become a battlefield, but I was not afraid anymore. I had facts, proof, dates, documents, and every attempt to smear me only made my case stronger, because while gossip travels fast, evidence travels further. I returned inside, poured a cup of tea, and opened the wooden box again, the keys resting inside like a quiet promise. And I whispered to no one in particular that I would not be broken by lies. Tell me, how long should a person stay silent while being disrespected? How long should you tolerate betrayal disguised as family? How long until you say enough and choose truth over peace? Because everyone has a breaking point, and mine was almost here. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, the silence stretching across every hallway, as if it were holding its breath. And I sat alone at the dining table with the wooden box in front of me, the keys resting inside like a promise I no longer knew how to keep because I loved my son, and part of me was terrified that drawing a hard line would push him away forever. And that is how toxic family patterns trap good people, not with violence, but with guilt. I poured a small glass of water, watched the lights of Highland Park shimmer through the window, and for the very first time since this ordeal began, doubt crawled into my bones, whispering that maybe I should just sign the escrow transfer. The house. Let the storm die. Pretend none of this happened, because some mothers will sacrifice everything just to remain loved by their children. I even opened the email from the attorney, the one with the draft instructions, my finger hovering above the reply button, and in that moment I imagined Drew, smiling Savannah, posing by the pool, and me fading quietly into the background, tolerated but never respected, alive but invisible, and the thought almost made me write my name on a decision I would regret forever. The breaking point of a revenge story is never the moment of anger. It is the moment you almost surrender, when the betrayal finally convinces you that you are the problem, when humiliation becomes normal, when the lies become familiar, and I felt myself slipping toward that edge, the way you feel yourself lean forward on a cliff before instinct pulls you back. My phone buzzed again with more church gossip screenshots, forwarded without context, people saying they were praying for me to soften, and I set the phone face down because kindness used as a weapon hurts more than cruelty spoken plainly, and my heart ached with the weight of years spent trying to be gracious. Then a thought cut through the noise, simple and sharp. If I gave away the house, now I would teach Savannah that disrespect wins, that manipulation pays, and that quiet women can be bullied into silence. And I refused to be a lesson that kept someone else powerful. So I stood up, took a slow breath, and chose a different kind of dignity. Not dramatic, not loud, just decisive. I opened my social media settings, removed every tag connecting me to her family, unfollowed them all, locked my profile, turned off comments, and made my online life a fortress of privacy, a silent reminder that I was done being the target of their smear games. It was a small move, a tiny act of self-respect, but it felt like oxygen returning to my lungs, and I whispered to the empty room that money was never the prize, dignity was. I thought the evening would end there quiet and uneventful until my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number 1 line written with venom. If you do not give the house, we will expose everything you are hiding. And the threat felt ridiculous because there was nothing to expose. My life was an open book, yet the intention was clear. They wanted fear, and fear is the currency of every toxic family betrayal. I copied the message and sent it to Naomi without hesitation, and minutes later she called, her voice calm and steady. She said, "Anonymous threats online are rarely anonymous people who gossip, always leave fingerprints," and she promised to trace it. I walked across the living room, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, waiting for her to call back, and when she finally did, her tone changed, firm and sharp. She told me the sender was connected to Savannah, not a stranger, not a coincidence, but a calculated move to intimidate me into surrendering the $5 million they believed they deserved, not earned. My chest tightened, anger mixing with heartbreak, because this was not just disrespect. This was aggression, and it became brutally clear that kindness was a language they did not understand. I sat beside the wooden box again, ran my thumb over the edges, and the keys glinted beneath the light symbols of a future I almost handed to someone who would have locked the door behind me and laughed. I thought of every woman who stayed silent to keep a family together, every mother who paid the price for peace, every grandmother who swallowed humiliation so her children would not feel uncomfortable. And something inside me hardened in the best way, the way steel hardens in fire, the way resolve is born from pain. I realized that the gossip, the public humiliation, the smear campaign, the threats, none of it would end with me giving the house. It would only grow bolder because toxic entitlement does not stop when fed, it only becomes hungrier. I closed the wooden box, carried it to my study, and locked it inside the safe, turning the dial, slowly listening to each click until the door sealed final and absolute, and with that sound, a chapter closed inside me. When I returned to the dining room, the night no longer felt heavy, just quiet like calm before truth, and I understood that real power is not revenge done in anger, it is revenge done with clarity. Before going to bed, I typed a note into my phone, short and simple. Tomorrow I choose myself, and for the first time since this began, I slept without guilt, because love without boundaries is not love, it is surrender, and I was done surrendering. Tell me, do you believe truth and closure will win against gossip? Do you believe dignity can stand alone even when everyone speaks against you? Because soon I would find out exactly how strong truth becomes when you refuse to bow to fear. The next morning, I woke with the kind of clarity that feels like steel settling in the spine. I showered, dressed, and sat at my desk with the papers Naomi had prepared, the notice of revocation of gift, the trust addendum ready to be locked, and the second cease and desist drafted with language that did not tremble. And with one steady breath, I signed my name not out of spite, but out of truth. Because respect is a condition of every blessing, and they had broken that condition loudly. The pen barely lifted before something shifted inside me. The fear that had haunted my decisions evaporated, replaced by a calm resolve, and I placed all the documents into a sealed envelope, stacked neatly as if they were bricks to rebuild a boundary. Then I opened a new email thread and sent invitations to family and friends. The subject line, simple and elegant, house tour announcement. And I booked the private room at the Dallas Petroleum Club, the same elegant room where Savannah laughed at me during brunch, the same polished floors where she had declared that some people came empty-handed, and I chose that location for a reason, not to humiliate her, but to let the truth stand where the lies were born. I ordered place cards, soft lighting, a projector, and a podium, and then I returned to the safe, opened it, and took out the wooden box, replacing the real keys with a placeholder, set shiny and impressive, but connected to nothing, because sometimes you must let the greedy reach for an illusion to show them how little they truly grasp. The real keys remained locked deep inside the safe, far from careless hands. Throughout the day, I prepared without hesitation, arranging evidence clips, messages, screenshots, the attempted $14,800 charge, the conversation about raiding a child's college fund, every insult, every smear, every act that showed entitlement wrapped in disrespect, and the file grew thicker, undeniable, and painfully honest. Late in the afternoon, Naomi stopped by, reviewed everything, nodded with satisfaction, and said the kind of sentence that makes a person breathe easier. The law is on your side. When evening settled and Highland Park turned golden with soft neighborhood lights, I sent the final confirmation to every guest, a polite message with elegant wording that revealed nothing, and then placed the sealed envelope on the counter where I would not forget it in the morning. It should have been a quiet night, but revenge stories have their own timing, and just after 9, my phone buzzed. It was Drew. His voice low and uncertain, asking if we could talk before the event, and I agreed. Not because I needed his approval, but because clarity looks better face to face. He arrived looking exhausted, his shoulders heavy, and he did not sit immediately. He paced the dining room once, then stopped and handed me his phone. And on the screen was a folder of screenshots and videos Colleen had sent him, proof of the lies, the gossip, the threats, the attempted theft, and the messages about the college fund. I watched his eyes as he waited for my reaction, and there was no smugness in them, only a silent breaking the realization that the woman he married had used his love to gain access to my life, my money, my name. He said nothing because there are moments when words only make the wound deeper, and I said nothing because silence sometimes teaches louder than lectures, and he sat down, head in his hands, while the truth rearranged everything he thought he knew. After a long stillness, he whispered that he did not know, that he thought Savannah just needed time, that he was afraid of choosing sides, and I told him gently that love without accountability turns to poison, and his eyes filled with shame, a kind that does not come from being scolded but from seeing clearly at last. He asked if there was anything he could do, and I told him the only thing that mattered was that he show up at the event and listen not for me, but for himself, for the marriage he thought he had, and he nodded, quiet and shaking. When he left, I sat in the living room and allowed myself one deep breath of sadness, because revenge is never purely sweet. It always carries the salt of broken trust. But I refused to be trapped in sorrow. Tomorrow was structured and precise, and every detail was set like clockwork. The next morning, the room at the Dallas Petroleum Club gleamed soft gold light, catching crystal glasses chairs arranged in elegant rows, my name on the lectern, and guests filtering in with curiosity, gossip, and anticipation. Savannah arrived in a dress too expensive for someone drowning in debt, her mother at her side, both smiling like women who believed the world bent for them, and they looked at the wooden box on the table with hunger in their eyes, certain that today was their moment of triumph. Drew arrived separately, quiet, pale, his jaw tight, and he did not move toward Savannah, a detail she noticed instantly, and her smile faltered for the first time. I greeted every guest with grace, thanked them for coming, and when the room was full, I stepped to the lectern. placed one hand on the wooden box, and felt the hush sweep across the room, the way a storm draws in the clouds. My voice did not shake when I began, because power sits calmly when you no longer need permission to speak. And I said, "Today is not a house tour. Today is a truth tour." The screen behind me lit with the first image, the first screenshot, the first insult spoken in public, useless mother-in-law, and a murmur rippled across the guests as Savannah's face drained of color. Slide by slide, the truth unfolded: the attempted theft, the gossip campaign, the church whispering, the college fund plan, and the footage from brunch, where she declared loudly that some people come empty-handed but demand to be called family. Every lie stood naked under the lights, and I watched her heart break under the weight of her own actions, because karma does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it arrives through a projector in a room full of witnesses. At the end, I placed my hand on the wooden box and said plainly, "Before everyone here, I revoke the gift of the $5 million house. It was never delivered, never deeded, never earned, and therefore remains mine." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that dents the air, and I closed the box and slipped it into my bag, not a performance but a boundary. Guests stared, some with shock, some with admiration, some with quiet satisfaction, and Savannah looked at Drew as if begging him to defend her, but he remained still, the truth too large to hide. When I finished, I thanked everyone for attending, invited them to enjoy refreshments, and stepped aside, leaving the evidence on the screen for anyone who doubted. Tell me, if it were you, would you choose quiet justice as I did, or would you have chosen loud revenge, because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade in the room? The air inside the private room at the Dallas Petroleum Club felt charged, the way the sky feels before lightning. The lights dimmed, the projector hummed alive, and every chair faced the screen where the truth waited. And I stood beside the lectern with the wooden box in my hand, not nervous, just steady, because humiliation had already taken its turn. Now it was time for dignity to answer. The first slide came up a photograph from the wedding reception. Everyone smiling champagne raised a perfect moment with a perfect caption, and I spoke calmly about love, about welcoming a new daughter into the family, about wanting to give them a home where they could build their future, and guests nodded politely because they still believed this gathering was about generosity. Then the next slide showed a screenshot of Savannah's late-night message, useless mother-in-law, typed so casually as if cruelty were a hobby, and a ripple of whispers moved across the room like wind across water. Her mother stiffened. Someone coughed, a few looked away, and Savannah's face shrank into itself, flushed with panic. I did not raise my voice. I simply clicked forward, showing the timeline, how the disrespect began with whispers, then rolled into public jabs, then full humiliation, and the projector became a mirror they could not escape. The brunch video played her voice ringing clearly through the speakers. Some people come empty-handed but demand to be called family. And I watched jaws tighten around the room, the same guests who laughed with her, now shifting uncomfortably in their seats, because truth always changes the temperature. Then screenshots of the attempted $14,800 charge appeared declined, glowing bright in red, followed by the messages discussing dipping into someone else's $529 fund, the casual entitlement to a child's future, and the shock in the room deepened. People leaning forward, absorbing each unforgiving detail of this revenge story. Money, this toxic family greed that had grown louder with every boundary ignored. I kept my voice even calm, controlled because anger was unnecessary. The evidence spoke louder than rage ever could. And at the moment, the room felt still enough to break. I placed the wooden box on the lectern, rested my hand on it, and said the sentence that cleaved the air open in front of everyone. I revoke the $5 million house, every word landing like a stone in water, sending waves through the silence. Savannah blinked as if she did not understand, her chest rising too quickly, her hands trembling, and guests stared at her with an expression that hovered between disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. And when I closed the box and lifted it into my bag, the symbolism was so clear that a few people actually gasped. Naomi stepped forward, then reading aloud the notice of revocation, the legal clarity that left no room for argument, no deed, no escrow, no transfer, no ownership ever granted, and the murmurs deepened. Because now it was not just family drama, it was contract law, trust, law, property law, and the weight of that truth made Savannah's posture collapse. Naomi continued outlining the non-disparagement draft, the conditions if either of them ever hoped to earn back goodwill, public apology, repayment of every fraudulent attempt, 12 months of counseling, 12 months with no mention of the house, and a signed agreement that no future slander would be tolerated. And as each requirement was spoken aloud, Savannah's face cracked with disbelief, because entitlement rarely expects consequences. Then came the tiny, bitter, hilarious piece of mini revenge. The final slide flashed with a giant QR code and the title, How to Say Thank You Suannuanawan, and the room erupted into uncomfortable laughter, guests covering their mouths, shoulders trembling because the joke was ruthless and polite at the same time, and that combination stings worse than shouting. Savannah stood her chair screeching across the polished floor, and she demanded that I stop the presentation. She accused me of shaming her, of misunderstanding her, of ruining her reputation. But the live streaming guest near the back had already begun broadcasting their phone, held discreetly but steadily. And within minutes, comments began rolling in, online people reacting, screen recording, sending clips to friends across Dallas, and the unraveling became public in real time. Her mother tried to intervene, telling everyone this was a family misunderstanding, but the evidence was still glowing on the screen, cold and factual, and guests did not move to comfort them because something in the air had shifted, the spell of entitlement finally broken. Drew remained seated, his eyes on the ground, the shame settling into his shoulders, and Savannah kept looking to him, begging silently for rescue. But he did not stand, he did not speak, he did not defend the indefensible, and that silence was louder than anything said in the entire room. I closed the presentation with a simple message. I believe respect is earned, not demanded, and no one has the right to humiliate a member of their family for money or status. If anyone wishes to stay for tea and dessert, you are welcome. If you wish to leave, the door is open. Some guests hugged me. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Some gave looks of approval that needed no words, and Savannah and her mother left quickly, moving through the doorway like ghosts trying to outrun their own shadows. I watched them go without satisfaction, only relief, because revenge through truth does not crave cruelty. It craves clarity, and the projector screen dimmed as I switched off the lights, the lingering hush of the room proving that everyone had witnessed something they would not forget. Later I learned that the live stream had reached thousands of viewers, neighbors, church members, co-workers, people who once believed the lies now confronted with the truth in high definition. And that is how gossip dies, not by arguing, but by exposure. On the drive home, I kept my hand steady on the wheel, the wooden box beside me in the passenger seat, and I felt a strange peace wash through my chest, the kind that comes only after you reclaim your own story. Tell me, would you call this revenge through truth, or simply standing up for yourself? Because some people do not understand that quiet justice can echo louder than any shouted confrontation. The fallout did not wait for morning. By the time the sun rose above the Dallas skyline, the live stream had already circulated through offices, neighborhood chats, church groups, and alumni circles. The clip of Savannah laughing about some people arriving, empty-handed, played beside the moment I revoked the $5 million house, and gossip turned on its maker with the same speed it once turned on me. By noon, her company placed her on temporary suspension for violating conduct and brand reputation policies. The email landed while she was still trying to run damage control, and suddenly all the people who once cheered her on went silent. Hearts and likes disappeared. Her friends stopped replying. Her curated social circle evaporated like sugar in hot water because public humiliation cuts deeper when the crowd that once applauded walks away. Her mother tried staging a sympathy post online claiming I had twisted the story, but Naomi responded with a quiet, devastating message to their attorney, a reminder that the gift was revocable. Until delivery, no escrow, no deed, no legal claim, and if they continued spreading lies, a defamation suit would follow with the entire timeline as evidence, and that shut the noise down faster than emotion ever could. Mark Savannah's attorney attempted one last desperate move, sending a letter that implied Drew was entitled to half of the house as marital property. But Naomi dismantled it with a single paragraph of contract logic that made the claim evaporate. The house remained legally mine, untouched, and inaccessible. While they scrambled, I decided on a small act of elegant pettiness, something that would twist the knife without drawing blood. I mailed a polite thank you card to every guest who attended the event. Inside each envelope was a printed photograph from the final moment me placing the wooden box into my tote bag. The caption written in beautiful cursive, "Thank you for coming and for respecting boundaries. It was refinement sharpened into a blade," and a few guests sent back notes calling it the most satisfying piece of stationery they had ever received. Savannah received one too, though she never acknowledged it, her silence proof that pride bleeds quietly. A few days later, Drew asked to meet at Naomi's office, and when he arrived, he was not the confident groom who married a woman he believed he understood. He looked smaller, raw around the edges, and he sat with his hands clasped, eyes lowered. Then finally he whispered that he was sorry, that he should have listened, that he should have defended me, that he thought love meant taking Savannah's side, and that the truth shattered him. I heard every word, and though part of me wanted to wrap him in comfort, the wiser part remembered every night. I cried quietly over disrespect, so instead of accepting his apology with warmth, I told him gently but firmly that words meant nothing without action, and if he wanted respect back in this family, he would have to earn it with decisions, not speeches. Naomi watched silently because this was not a legal moment. It was a human one, a mother setting a boundary not with anger but with clarity, and Drew nodded his face, flushed with shame, and he asked what he could do. What step came first, and I told him the same thing I had told her: accountability before forgiveness. And he swallowed hard because accountability requires courage, not comfort. As he left the office, the Dallas sky turned soft blue, cool wind brushing the sidewalks, and I realized something important, that reclaiming respect does not always come with hugs and tears. Sometimes it comes with distance and expectation, because relationships cannot heal when only one person does the work. Later that afternoon, messages began arriving from women I barely knew, neighbors, church members, acquaintances, thanking me for standing up for myself, thanking me for exposing the cruelty instead of hiding it, and that quiet chorus of support filled some corner of my heart that had been empty for a long time. People often think revenge is about hurting someone back, but this was never about breaking Savannah. It was about refusing to let her break me, and the consequences unfolded naturally because entitlement always collapses under its own weight once truth is revealed. That night, I sat on my porch with the wooden box beside me, a cup of tea warming my hands, and I watched the lights of Highland Park flicker across the horizon, thinking of every older woman who had been humiliated for being generous, every mother-in-law who became the villain in someone else's story, simply for refusing to be used, and I felt something like peace settle inside my ribs. The next step belonged to Drew, not to me, because grown children must choose whether to stand with truth or hide behind excuse, and I wondered whether his apology would turn into change or fade into regret. Tell me, in your life, do you believe reclaiming respect requires a spoken apology, or do you believe that only actions prove someone understands the pain they caused? Because I had learned the hard way that dignity can be given second chances, but it cannot be handed out for free. A week later, just when the dust seemed to be settling and my days had returned to quiet routines, Savannah appeared at my door without warning. Her makeup smeared her breath, shaking her voice cracking as she said she was sorry that she never meant any of it, that the wedding stress had changed her, that the live stream ruined her life, and she begged for a second chance, not because she suddenly loved me, but because consequences finally cornered her, and entitlement cannot breathe without someone to blame. She cried like a child denied a toy, dramatic and loud, the kind of crying meant to pull sympathy from anyone watching. But I had spent too many nights crying quietly and alone to be manipulated by tears now. So I invited her inside, sat across from her, and waited for her to speak without interruption. She said the suspension at work was unfair, that her friends misunderstood that people were attacking her online. And for a moment, I wondered if she truly believed that the world owed her forgiveness simply because she was uncomfortable. And when she asked if I would reconsider the house for the sake of family peace, I felt the last remaining thread of patience snap. I told her calmly that forgiveness and foolishness were two different things, and if she wanted a path back into this family, it would not be paved with excuses, but with accountability, and her face stiffened as if she did not recognize the woman speaking. I laid out the conditions clearly without anger, without shaking, just truth. A signed public apology acknowledging her behavior, repayment of any fraudulent attempts, 12 therapy sessions with documentation, 12 months of silence about the house or gifts, and a signed non-disparagement agreement that protected my name from future gossip, and I watched her expression twist from panic to disbelief because entitlement hates rules. She said it was too much, that I was being cruel, that she already suffered enough. But suffering is not punishment when it is simply consequence, and I told her that if she truly wanted forgiveness, she would choose change, not shortcuts. Her tears dried instantly, then her voice sharpened, and she accused me of ruining her life on purpose, of seeking revenge instead of reconciliation. And I did not argue, I only pointed her toward the door, because you cannot reason with a person who only hears what fits their narrative. After she left, I performed a small act of petty honesty, a mini revenge that tasted like lemon and steel. I emailed her a link to a free financial literacy class for beginners, added a note saying it could help her avoid future mistakes, and I even tagged her in the announcement online so she could not pretend she missed it, and people who saw it laughed quietly, because it was both kind and cutting a reminder that respect starts with responsibility. Days passed, and silence filled the space between us until a letter arrived from her attorney claiming defamation, demanding a retraction, threatening legal action. And for a few seconds, I stared at the page with a mix of disbelief and exhaustion, because this was the audacity of entitlement returning in full force. I forwarded everything to Naomi, who responded with a calm that could freeze the ocean. She gathered every clip, every screenshot, every forwarded message, every audio recording, and prepared a full legal packet with timestamps and metadata, a mountain of truth against a handful of lies. And when she filed it, the claim collapsed faster than a poorly built wall, dismissed without hearing, because evidence is heavier than accusation. Savannah tried again, posting a vague online message about being betrayed by family, but the comments were empty. No support, no sympathy, no audience, because the community had already seen the truth, and gossip cannot survive once its roots are pulled out. Meanwhile, Drew moved into a small apartment near his workplace, no longer pretending that his marriage was a fairy tale, and he began attending therapy sessions alone. Not because I demanded it, but because he finally understood that avoiding conflict had cost him more than facing it ever would. He came by one evening with quiet eyes and asked if I would help him learn how to manage his finances, and I agreed not to rescue him, but to teach him to stand without leaning on anyone's generosity. And he listened, really listened, as if growing up had finally become a choice rather than an accident. Savannah disappeared from our lives after that, fading into the background where consequences live, and I did not miss her, not because revenge was sweet, but because peace is sweeter. Sometimes justice does not need hate. It only needs proof boundaries and a refusal to bow to manipulation. And as I sat on my porch watching the Texas evening fade into quiet blue, I wondered how many women had endured similar pain in silence. Tell me honestly, do you believe justice without hate is enough, or do some people only learn when the lesson cuts a little deeper? Because I had finally learned how to protect my peace without losing myself. In the weeks that followed the lawsuit collapsing and Savannah vanishing from every social circle she once controlled, the world moved with a slower rhythm, as if the chaos had finally surrendered to quiet. And in that stillness, Drew made a decision I had been silently waiting for. He filed for legal separation, packed a few boxes, and moved into a modest one-bedroom near his office, a place he could afford without help. A place where he would learn what adulthood feels like when no one is shielding you from reality. He started therapy not because a court forced him, but because he could finally see how deep the damage had gone, how silence had become his way of surviving a toxic marriage. And I saw a new seriousness in his eyes, a man trying to rebuild himself without shortcuts. I did not reward him with the house or any financial privilege, because a consequence without growth is just a bruise. So instead, I offered him something better, a one-year mentorship at the company. Charles and I built no salary beyond entry level, no special treatment, no fast track, just hard work and learning how to earn respect instead of inheriting it. Every Monday, he started at the bottom, reading contracts, learning compliance, shadowing accountants, enduring long days that ended with tired eyes and ink smudged on his cuffs. And every Friday, I handed him a small sealed envelope labeled Anonymous Case Study. Inside each one was a real situation we had handled years before, stories of employees who struggled, clients who lied, families who betrayed one another over money, and I made him solve each scenario without asking me for help, because I wanted him to build a spine made of knowledge, not reliance. At first, he stumbled his solutions too idealistic or too emotional, but slowly his answers sharpened, his thinking matured, and I began to see glimpses of the man Charles hoped he would become: steady, fair, less naive. The house remained untouched in my safe, and instead of filling my time with legal battles or bitterness, I put my energy into something that had been growing inside me for months. An idea born from every message I received from older women who watched my story unfold. Women who were humiliated, used manipulated women who stayed silent because they thought no one would believe them. And I realized that I could turn my pain into something useful. So I established a small foundation, at first then expanded it into a full nonprofit clinic named Widowed and Wise, a place where older women could receive free financial and legal guidance, a place where their voices mattered, where inheritance drama and family betrayal did not swallow them whole, and I hired counselors, lawyers, and community volunteers, transforming my quiet revenge into a public resource. The day we opened, a woman hugged me and whispered that she wished someone like me existed when her children turned on her, and I felt something warm settle in my chest, a healing deeper than any revenge story could reach. Meanwhile, the internet did what the internet always does. It turned a single moment into a ripple that grew wider with each share. The live stream clip was trimmed down to a 1-minute highlight, dubbed online as the Room Switch Minute. The exact moment Savannah mocked me, and the camera accidentally caught her being seated at the back after she demanded a VIP spot, and the short clip went viral in Dallas, hitting 1 million views in local community groups, church forums, neighborhood pages, and the comment sections filled with people cheering for quiet justice, silent revenge, and dignity over money. Some said my calm destroyed her louder than shouting ever would. Some said the look on her face when the keys disappeared into my bag was the most satisfying karma they had ever seen. And while I did not celebrate her downfall, it felt strangely poetic that the story she tried to control slipped from her hands and told itself to the world without her permission. Drew watched the video once, then closed his laptop and said it hurt to see how blind he had been. But pain can be a teacher when pride steps aside, and slowly, week after week, his conversations changed. Less about how things used to be, more about how he wanted to rebuild. And one evening, he surprised me by volunteering at Widowed and Wise, greeting older women at the door, pouring coffee, listening to their stories with empathy he once lacked. Life did not become perfect, but it became honest, and honesty is a kind of healing most families never reach. Sometimes I walked through the quiet rooms of my house, with the wooden box still locked away, not out of spite, but as a reminder that blessings should never be handed to people who weaponize kindness, and with each passing month, I felt lighter, as if the weight that once sat on my chest had dissolved into something softer, something peaceful. One night after closing the clinic, I stepped outside and saw the Dallas skyline glowing against the dark, and I understood that I had reclaimed everything Savannah tried to steal, not just the house or the money, but my dignity, my confidence, my voice, and my sense of worth. Tell me if you believe that dignity matters more than money. If you believe that quiet justice can be louder than revenge, comment quiet justice, and where you are watching from, because every woman who has been underestimated deserves to know that she is not alone. Several months later, long after the gossip had burned out and the live stream clip had stopped circulating in every neighborhood group, an email arrived in my inbox with a subject line that carried no confidence. Simply the words, "I am sorry." And when I opened it, the message inside was from Savannah. Her tone strangely formal, explaining that she had lost her job permanently, that no company wanted to hire someone tied to a public integrity issue, that she had been dropped from sponsorships and social invitations, and that she finally understood how deeply she had disrespected me. Yet the apology did not come from remorse. It came from consequence, and consequences do not soften boundaries. She asked whether we could start fresh, whether the house gift could be reconsidered, whether I could speak to someone at her company on her behalf. And I read the email twice slowly, feeling no hatred, no anger, just distance, as if her words were coming from another lifetime, and I wrote back with calm clarity, "I accept your apology, but the gift remains revoked. Forever. Respect must come before generosity, not after." I sent the reply and did not wait for a response, because closure does not require conversation, and I closed my laptop with a quiet sense of finality. Meanwhile, Drew continued his slow rebuilding, arriving every morning at the company before sunrise, leaving long after sunset, completing his therapy sessions without prompting and asking questions. He was once too proud to ask, and every week his shoulders seemed straighter, his voice steadier, and the man who once avoided conflict now faced challenges with quiet maturity. We did not rush our relationship. We let healing grow in small, steady moments. Sunday dinners with no tension, phone calls that did not feel forced, and every now and then he would look at me with a softness that said thank you without needing words. One afternoon he brought me a binder full of his solutions to the anonymous case studies, each one carefully written, thoughtful, thorough. And when I finished reading them, I realized he had finally learned to think like a man who earned his place, not inherited it. And I felt a pride that had nothing to do with money or accomplishments, only growth. Seasons changed. The Texas heat softened into early autumn, and one late afternoon I drove to Lakeside Park, a quiet place Charles used to bring me when life felt too heavy. The lake shining under the orange light ducks, drifting lazily across the water. Children running with their hair caught in the breeze, and I sat on a bench beneath a willow tree with the wooden box resting in my lap, unopened, untouched, a symbol of what could be given, but was no longer owed. I traced the smooth grain of the wood, remembering the night I nearly signed the escrow papers out of fear, the moments I almost surrendered my boundaries for family peace. And I closed my eyes because the air smelled like jasmine and sunlight, and I finally understood that sometimes the greatest revenge is not taking something away, but keeping control of it and giving it to no one who does not deserve it. The box stayed closed, and I smiled, not because I won, but because I did not lose myself to be polite. When I stood to leave, I tucked the box under my arm and whispered to the water that respect is the down payment of every gift, something every woman should learn before she gives too much. Later that night, I brewed a cup of peppermint tea, sat on my porch, and watched the streetlights blink on each one like a small promise that darkness never arrives without light somewhere nearby. And I thought of every woman who wrote to me, every story of betrayal, every whispered humiliation, and I wished I could sit with them one by one to say, "You are not weak for loving, but you are strong for stopping the wrong people from taking more." My story did not end with a courtroom or a dramatic speech. It ended with peace boundaries and a life that felt like my own again, and that is the kind of ending many women never get to see. If this story reached someone who needed to feel seen, if it reminded someone that dignity matters more than money, if it helped someone believe they deserve respect, even when the world tells them to stay quiet, then every painful chapter was worth it. If this touched you in any way about quiet justice, silent revenge, emotional resilience, dignity over money, truth and closure, standing up for yourself, reclaiming respect, lesson in betrayal, justice without hate, leave one word still here and tell me where you are watching from, because stories like this are not just mine. They belong to every woman who finally chose herself.